Welcome to the Reach Football Digest show. Joining me this week are Andy Dunn, Chief Sports Writer of the Daily Mirror, John Cross, no relation, Chief Football Writer of the Daily Mirror, and Matt Dunn, Head Honcho at the Daily Express. Morning, guys.
Morning.
Morning. It's obviously a week that's going to be dominated by England and, well, things going off the pitch as well as on it. But can we just hark back to what was a remarkable weekend of Premier League football last weekend, now known as Super Sunday. Absolute crazy day of results. Leicester lost at home to West Ham 3-0, and that was like an afterthought by the end of the day after what followed at Old Trafford and with the Liverpool game at Villa. Andy, can I just ask you, what did you make of that game at Villa Park?
I was at Villa Park for that game, lucky enough to be at Villa Park for that game. It was just a remarkable game. I mean, you called it Super Sunday, we could call it Surreal Sunday, really. It was. I was talking to the other lads, the other journos at the game when we got there, and we said, well, it looks like we won't be getting a massive amount of coverage from here tomorrow. Straightforward Liverpool win, and obviously Wilshere, Man United, and Spurs will dominate the back pages, and then when Liverpool were 4-1 down at half time, we were having a rethink. It was incredible. Listen, no one could possibly say they saw that coming, but people could possibly say that. And those of us again who were and I think you were there. I think I probably were next to you, well, 2 meters away from you, at Anfield when Liverpool beat Leeds 4-3 on the opening day of the season. If you remember, Jeremy, Leeds had three attempts on goal, three shots on target, and all three resulted in goals. So that might have given you the hint that actually, if you create chances against Liverpool, you've got a good chance of scoring, and that's exactly what happened. Every time Villa got the ball, they looked as though they were going to score. They obviously played on this the fabled high line of Liverpool. They broke through every single time. They counter-attacked. And what's remarkable is we're going to look at these games, sometimes. And when City were beaten 5-2 by Leicester, and Liverpool were beaten 7-2 by Villa, I think Leicester had 28% of possession, scored 5. Villa had 31% of possession, scored 7. And could have scored 8, 9, maybe even 10. So teams are changing, I think, the template of the way you play against these big teams. And it was just a remarkable game. Listen, it was freakish. That's not going to happen again. A team isn't going to sit back, counter-attack and score every time almost they go forward. But it was a sobering day let's say a sobering day, a reminder to Klopp that, the defence at the moment seems to have switched off, seems to have got complacent, seems to have got a little bit lazy.
John, do you think that result is a watershed moment in terms of giving other sides genuine hope that Liverpool can be beaten this season over the course of a Premier League title campaign?
You know what, Jeremy? I think it actually is a watershed moment. I also think it's a kind of a focal point for the season, which says to me that this is going to be an absolutely crazy season. I don't think it's a freak result. I don't think it's a coincidence. You can look at it and say it is a freak result, and of course, in many ways, it is. I'm not sort of ignoring that, but I just think amid this crazy demanding schedule, on the back of a very difficult, challenging pre-season, some of the players are half cooked. I think some of the players are just not ready. I think that Liverpool had defensive issues this season, which in a normal summer, I think they'd probably iron out. Klopp might even look to strengthen a little bit more. His priorities lay elsewhere. He did do 2 big deals in the end. Yes, he signed, obviously, perhaps a sort of a backup left back as well. But would he have brought in another centre half? Would he have done something a little bit different midfield-wise to give him a bit more sort of cover? I think that arguably they would have strengthened a little bit more and addressed it. But much more than that, I think that they basically would have ironed it out a bit more in pre-season had they had time. And I think the schedule's not allowed that. I think that Liverpool will still be the best team in the country. I think they'll win the title. But I think that basically they'll have as many challenges as other teams. And I think they will be exposed by those faults which they haven't perhaps had time or the cash to completely address. But much more than that, I think it'll be the same for everyone. I think that's why Man City, were pummeled that day by Leicester. I think that's why Leicester suddenly, I mean, they're flying, aren't they? And then all of a sudden given the bloody nose by West Ham, you know, and I just think there'll be these freak results because teams will be tired. I mean, you know, the international fixtures come at a time when I think most managers would go, God, blimey, I need a rest. And Liverpool then have a clutch of Brazilians flying off to Brazil and then on to Peru. And then they have to fly home from Peru for the Merseyside derby. I mean, that's just almost gone under the radar. It's just a sort of, and it's become an accepted fact. So good luck with that one as your preparation for the Merseyside derby. And I think it's a genuine, fear. And I think you will get those crazy results because of the players' condition, because of fatigue, because of tiredness right throughout the season. And I have to say, I can't wait. I think that basically, we should be looking out for pure football. Yes, we should want players at their best. But if it throws up crazy days like Sunday, then I'm all for it.
Matt, obviously fans are still banned from going to games, so everyone's watching the season unfold on the TV. This makes for great television, doesn't it? It's ironic, really, that everyone's glued to the telly and we're getting some fantastic games and results and outcomes. There's been 144 goals scored already in the Premier League, which I think is a record. Should we welcome it, or would you like to see games tighter and better defending? Would you want to see entertainment over containment?
It's funny you should mention the fans, because I think that's part of the reason why the scores are running away with themselves. When you're 3-4-2 down and you are tired anyway, the only thing normally making you chase through and play for a bit of pride to the final whistle are the fans that are going to boo you if you don't chase your man, don't keep up with play. And because they're not there, it becomes like a training exercise. And when one team's in the ascendancy, they tend to run on and score goal after goal after goal. And I think it's the absence of fans that are adding to that sort of those goal tallies. It's a different style of football. And it's great for television. It's just a shame that perhaps one of the most intriguing seasons for the Premier League, we hope fans get to enjoy it firsthand soon, because it's turning into a bit of a belter.
Andy, obviously Liverpool stole the headlines because they got tonked, but Villa were very impressive, and Ross Barkley seemed to settle in quickly to his new role at Villa. What did you make of his relationship with Grealish? Because between them, they ripped Liverpool's defence to pieces at times.
Yes, Jeremy. I mean, it was always going to happen that when a defending Premier League champion, especially one who won the league so emphatically, gets beaten 7-2 at a team that only just escaped relegation, the story is going to be about how the mighty Liverpool were toppled instead of how great Villa were, and they were fantastic. They were absolutely fantastic. Listen, I'll give a special mention to various players. John McGinn, Douglas Luiz, they were superb in midfield. Trezeguet thought did well. And obviously Ollie Watkins was just demonstrated what a natural finisher he is. But Grealish and Barkley were outstanding. I mean, Jack Grealish, that was Jack Grealish. If there were any doubters out there, then that should have actually silenced them once and for all. That was a sublime display. That moment when he puts Van Dijk one way, then the other, and then just puts the ball, nutmegs him through his legs to give Ross Barkley a great chance of scoring, which he missed, was just it's going to be one of the moments of the season. It'll be one of the most replayed moments of the season. And they just, they had this method. This is where Barkley, so they played Trezeguet, Watkins, Grealish, and then they had Barkley basically breaking the line every single time. Liverpool playing the high line, and then the ball through to Barkley. It worked. It must have worked 3 times. He missed a couple, and obviously he got the goal via a deflection. But he didn't do anything spectacularly sort of like skillful, Barkley. He just picked his runs well, and clearly Grealish was looking for him every time. It's obvious that is going to be a very good combination. Don't get me started on the rights and wrongs of Ross Barkley being on loan at Aston Villa. I see Chelsea have loaned another one. So Ruben Loftus-Cheek is now so not content with loaning one England international to Aston Villa, they now loan another to Fulham. They've already got 3 out on loan, so they've got 5. Players on loan of 5 Premier League clubs. Chelsea, they've got an influence on 5 other Premier League clubs. I don't think it's right that Ross Barkley is at Aston Villa, but I do think he will be an absolutely fantastic signing for them. And I do think, now they've got this momentum, he will keep that momentum going. And seriously, I mean, they looked a really good team, and he looks a really good addition. He shouldn't be there, but he's a really good addition.
John, talking of signings, obviously the transfer window closed on Monday.
Yeah.
It felt to me a little diluted compared to previous ones in terms of, obviously there's been a huge impact this time round with the COVID and everything. Do you agree with me, or do you think it panned out how you thought it would?
No, it didn't pan out how I thought it would. I'll be perfectly honest. I think I was someone that was right in that basically it would have a massive impact. The coronavirus and the pandemic and the financial impact on football, and particularly Premier League clubs, on what they did this summer. And listen, it clearly did on some clubs, and some clubs were a little bit more cautious, and some clubs obviously sell before they could buy. Some clubs were quite reserved. I mean, I have to say, you look at Spurs, for example, they didn't, by comparison, by some of their rivals. Yes, they bought Højbjerg, they bought Doherty, but they're kind of, shopping at one end of the market. Whereas I think in previous years, they might have thought, well, actually, we need to push on again. So let's go really big. By the way, I think they're, decent signings, particularly Doherty. I know Højbjerg caught the headlines on Sunday, but I just think that's a bit of a case in point. Some of the clubs, obviously, Burnley didn't do anything, did they? So it's, so there's no doubt about it. It's affected clubs in different ways. I mean, let's be clear here. Liverpool set off by not, saying that they wouldn't do very much at all, and they would have to sort of kind of sell before they could buy, and ended up doing two big substantial deals. So I just think if you look at the figures overall, I think the actual spend was big in relative terms. And Man United, obviously, everyone looks at them. They did a late one. I just think it has ended up surprising me, because I just think that clubs would have reined it in and been a bit more sensible. Look at Arsenal. I mean, Arsenal kind of that they have been very, very ambitious this window.
Can I just ask you about Partey? Obviously, he was probably the most significant move of the day. Joined Arsenal in a big deal from Atletico Madrid. Do you think that's a significant signing for Arsenal in terms of them making a statement of where they want to get to?
Yeah, massive. I think it's a huge statement. I really do. And listen, I think it's a bold one. I think that on Sunday, when I was at Sheffield United, kind of people talking to people around the scenes, that basically, I don't think that they thought that they would get one in. I think it was clear from day one. I think that Arteta's first priority in midfield was to buy a deeper line player, 6 if you like, and Partey was his preferred option rather than Aouar from Lyon, who came to the fore a little bit later, and obviously that one didn't work out. I think that Partey is a player that perhaps gives them a physical presence, a strength, and an intelligence in the midfield of how to run that midfield in a disciplined way, that allows them perhaps to go back to a 4-3-3, to get the best out of their frontline players. And I think it's a big statement signing in that they could have let Monday drift. And I think most people thought that they would. But they thought, right, we're going to have one more go. I think the owner, Stan Kroenke, and the ownership has basically said, right, okay, we're going to underwrite the last year's transfer business. They underwrote the coronavirus, losses. And indeed, they kind of, guaranteed the spending this time. People always say, it's time they put money in the club. Well, they're not quite doing that, but they are kind of guaranteeing the kind of the money, the funds that they have to keep in reserve. So, it is a significant one. I do think it pushes on Arsenal, because I think they were a bit short in midfield, and that was clear. And as I say, I think they could have gone through, and I think the intention originally was to go through this season. If they could, if they could get another midfield in, fine. If they couldn't, then that such is life. But I actually think that's a huge statement, because it's just that process of, yes, we're happy with what we've got, and that might get us into the top 4. But actually, signing Thomas Partey is an intent, is a sign of intent, and saying, actually, we really want to push on, and we believe we can get into top 4. That's the difference.
Matt, who for you had a good window and who had a bad window?
I think, again, to reiterate, I think Spurs, given that Mourinho arrived a year ago and said that he didn't need to sign anybody, and suddenly he's pulled in about 5 or 6, including Gareth Bale, I think that's got to be a good window for him. And they were just a centre-back, perhaps short of it being a perfect window. So they've done very well. And it comes back to who's had a bad window. And I think, very personally, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. You blame Ed Woodward or whatever, but it's not clever. They've not signed the players that he wanted. They've not backed him. And then all of a sudden there's rumours with Mauricio Pochettino around. Manchester United are a mess. And if Sunday wasn't the kick up the backside they needed before deadline day, and they're not able to act on that kick up the backside, you wonder whether or not they're losing faith. I mean, you're closer to the club than I am, but it doesn't look, from a distance, it doesn't look as if it's looking particularly clever for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at the moment.
Andy, I was at Old Trafford last weekend. I left there thinking, crikey, that's something you don't see very often. United getting tonked 6-1 at home. And then I got home to realise that I'd not even been at the biggest story of the day. But what they've obviously signed, the headline signing for United was Cavani on a free transfer. He left PSG in June. Will he bring a lot of kudos to United? United thinks experience is going to be invaluable to the younger players around him. Can he still score the goals they need, or is he just an expensive sticking plaster, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it's a sticking plaster. It's just what United's can afford to do, and he's just a risk. He's an adornment. It's something that was available. Cavani's available. Obviously, there's only a certain amount of clubs that would pay his wages, and you're taking him on a relatively short-term basis. And it might come off. It might come off in the same way that Ibrahimovic come off. It might not come off in the same way that Falcao didn't come off. So I guess I don't think they should be lambasted for signing Cavani. I think it's something that they're entitled to do, to give it a whirl. He might. We don't know. He might well score the goals he scored all his career. And they might get a year out of him, 2 years out of him. And they probably need that sort of focal point in attack. So I've got no particular problem with Cavani. I wouldn't use Cavani yet as a stick to beat United with. What I would say is that they clearly haven't addressed issues that probably need addressing, which is in central defence, in particular, maybe even a holding midfielder. They just don't seem to, having said that, at times last season maybe, we can't completely change on a couple of games. And I think that's what the danger we sometimes fall into. At one point, we were saying how good Harry Maguire was at the centre of Manchester United defence. We were saying how the options were there for Maguire and Lindelof. At one point, they had a good run of games when they looked as though they could form a partnership. Maguire and Bailly maybe could have done so. And all of a sudden, on the back of the evidence of 3 games, that came pretty quickly for Man United after their Europa League involvement, we're now saying that, the central defenders are the worst central defenders we've ever seen at Old Trafford, and that Maguire is a cart horse, etc., etc. I don't think we can just change, game by game. So I'm not sure, I wouldn't blame Ole for thinking, well, maybe I was okay defensively last year, when their defensive record was clearly quite decent. But obviously, I think you can't have enough quality backup, and I don't think he knew what his best central defensive pairing was. So I don't understand why they didn't address that situation. Certain areas they haven't addressed. It's not a good look either when other teams are doing their business early on and you're going down to the wire when you're scrabbling around with a bit of a supermarket sweep job on the last day. They've got a couple of good, promising young players in. Obviously, Tellers came in as well. So they'll point to the fact that they probably signed 4 players. So I don't know. Let's wait and see what happens. It wasn't a good look. I agree. But then again, if those signings work out and clubs who got their business done early, their signings don't work out, then who's done the better? Who's had the better sort of approach to it? For example, just very quickly, you asked Matt there about who's had a good window and who's had a bad window. Again, the bottom line is we won't know until these players settle in, and we won't know until the results come out over the next few months. But I would suggest, people are pointing to, City got their business done early, but is their business particularly good? Is Nathan Ake, Ruben Dias and Ferran Torres going to turn them from where they were, how far they were behind Liverpool last season, to closer? I mean, I would suggest possibly not. I wouldn't be at all. I'm dubious about City's transfer window. Never mind United's. The best transfer window, I think, that was Everton. Everton made 3 signings that basically can transform them as a team and their whole approach to the game.
John, when Mourinho was manager of United in the summer window of 2018, it sort of became a bit of an infamous period because we were in America and Mourinho was briefing journalists covering the tour that, he was seriously annoyed with Ed Woodward about not signing the players he'd asked him to sign. Fast forward to this summer, and I know it's been a delayed window, but it all feels, and Mourinho obviously got sacked that Christmas, so, he won 5 of 13 games. It all feels a bit like history repeating itself in the sense that Solskjaer wanted Sancho from Dortmund. Dortmund dug their heels in. United had a very public pursuit of him and didn't manage to get him. They've not signed in areas where they really need to sign players, like Andy said, in defence. Solskjaer made a terrible start to the season with 2 defeats in 3 games. So do you feel like it's too soon to panic for United, or are we heading down a familiar road with them?
I don't think we're heading down a familiar road. I think we're heading down a familiar road in the sense that I'm not completely convinced about Man United this season. But I think there's a very, very striking difference. And I think it's, I'm not sure, I've rather like Andy's position on Premier League loans. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this Man United former players and former, particularly pundits, teammates, ex-teammates of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who just seem to be ignoring the fact that Solskjaer is actually manager of
Whoever
a club.
could you mean?
I mean, it's just bonkers. It is just bonkers. I mean, you watch the analysis and you think, do you know that guy? That guy, sat in the dugout or kind of on the touchline. He's the manager, don't you? It's just I don't know where we're going with this. I mean, it's bonkers. They've lost 6-1 at home. They have been wretchedly set up. It's a bad team selection. It's a wretched performance. The players don't look ready. They don't look at it, and yet you'd never know it. Come on, guys, wake up. I mean, really.
Can I just ask you, if you were Ed Woodward and you look at what's happening so far, would you start to think in your mind, I might have to start considering having to make a change at some stage before the end of the year?
Yeah, I would, yeah. No, I would. Look, I think it's pretty clear that last season that they went out on a limb and said, look, we believe in Solskjaer. We're going to make a statement here. We're going to stick with him. Because there were sticky points last season, weren't there? And Bruno Fernandes turned their season around. He was like the focal point of their season, going from bad to brilliant. And their run to the end of the season gave genuine belief, including myself, that United could not only be sort of kind of, pushing for top 4 this season, but maybe even title challenges. I don't think anyone expects them to win the title. But the one thing is that they can't afford to do is go backwards. Well, the results, losing at home badly to Crystal Palace, then losing at home horrendously to Tottenham suggests that they are. And look, yes, of course you can point to the transfer business. Yes, they've got Telles, which will strengthen them on deadline day. Cavani's a gamble, it's a risk. I actually think that, Donny van der Beek is a very good sign and a very good value. But, where I think the former teammates of Solskjaer, the guy that doesn't actually manage Man United, are right to blame Man United because they've got everything tuned on Man United, is their transfer business, simply because the pursuit of Sancho is a shocker for United, going back to that. Because I just feel that if you're savvy in the market, and you look at a Liverpool, for example, and they're savvy and they know basically where they can target and where a club means no and basically where to move on to. If you're savvy in the market, you know how Dortmund work. Dortmund said from day one, we want £110 million for Jadon Sancho, and basically we've got a deadline. Once that deadline passes, we want our players in camp. We want them prepared for the season. When both those things were not met and matched by United, forget it. And United should know the market and who they're dealing with well enough to say, okay, we've missed the boat. They're not going to crack. When other clubs say that's their demand, you know that basically somewhere down the line they might crack. Not with Dortmund. You know, that's how Dortmund run their football club. And I just think that's the naivety, and that's an example of a badly structured transfer strategy. And I think from that, you know, they should have gone all in early on, or thought, okay, Sancho's not worth it, and looked elsewhere. Don't leave it until the last minute. That's bad planning, I think. And I have to say, you know, from that point of view, I get the criticism of Man United. But I think right now, I look at it, Jeremy, and I do think that United have to be questioning the manager, that they can go into a season looking badly prepared for that season. And that was illustrated and highlighted and underlined by Tottenham's absolute destruction of them at Old Trafford. And I think the board are right to be thinking, is Solskjaer the man, or do we have to look at Mauricio Pochettino?
Andy, I'll come back to you in a minute. I just want to ask Matt Dunn. Cavani left PSG in June, so he's essentially available three months ago. Why would United wait until 2 hours before the deadline to sign him? And do you think if United had a director of football in place at Old Trafford, that would have happened? I mean, would silly little things like that be avoided if they had a director of football in place?
Well, he's a panic buyer, isn't he? Oh, goodness, we've got to buy somebody. Let's go get him because we know we can get him, having made an absolute horlicks to trying to get Jadon Sancho. If a director of football would make those strategic mistakes that Crossy's just outlined, I don't know. It's down to the individual. Ed Woodward's not doing this on purpose, getting this horrendously wrong. And the director of football may know a little bit better and may avoid some of these pitfalls. But no, Cavani was just a panic buy right at the end. And as we all know from Andy Carroll onwards, panic buys the last minute don't really work. I love the fact that they're trying to paint him as a new Ibrahimovic. He's a human, not a lion. I mean, Zlatan brought a whole ethos and a breath of fresh air into the club when he arrived. And to expect Cavani to do that is just, you know, pie in the sky thinking. He's just somebody that they desperately tried to get through the door just to try and appease the fans to a certain degree and make it suggest that they are interested in moving forward.
Andy, do you think the job's too big for Solskjaer? And with somebody like Pochettino just basically hanging around, available, you know, is that a strange situation for you in terms of should United be thinking about making a decision on that and bringing Pochettino in?
The job is beginning to look too big for him. I just want to go back to what John said there about Ollie escaping criticism to a certain extent and about how the team was set up against Tottenham. Well, I was at that Palace game, the opening game of the season, and the team selection to start with was odd. I mean, Fosu-Mensah played, I think, right back. Daniel James played, you know, not to be seen again. McTominay and Fred Van der Beek on the bench. It was when we got the team sheet, we thought, hang on, you know, this is odd. And of course, the performance then basically backed up what we thought, and they were beaten. And I also think if you look around, look. I mentioned Everton before and about those transformative signs they've made in the transfer window in Alan, James Rodriguez, and Doucouré. Now they've come there. Now, would they have gone to Everton? Well, certainly would Alan and James Rodriguez have gone to Everton just for the money? Possibly. But what really swayed it for them? What swayed it for them was Carlo Ancelotti. And it's not rocket science. Ancelotti is about to show at Everton, and is showing at Everton, basically just the value of a world-class manager. Simple as that. And Everton, Mashiri, has employed a world-class manager. It's as simple as that. Liverpool have one. You know, Manchester City have one. And whatever your thoughts on him, whether or not he might be on the wane, Tottenham Hotspur have one. And the fact of the matter is, you know, United have an old boy who's managed, who didn't do too well at Cardiff, and managed in Norway. And that's the simple facts of the matter. You know, you are asking Solskjaer essentially to book the trend. And at the moment, you know, I am all for, you know, giving him a go. But it's beginning to look like that might be, the job might be too much for him. And I do think, you know, I don't think right now is the time to look at it. But I do think, you know, the clock is ticking. I think, you know, you will get literally to Christmas, and if this level of performance and results doesn't pick up dramatically, then I'm afraid you've got no option. As you say, Jeremy, particularly with the manager of Pochettino there. Now, people will turn around and say, and I know exactly what people are going to say, well, what's Pochettino won? Nothing. And they're right, obviously. But what Pochettino has done is got a level of performance out of players at Spurs that was above what we expected. He's got them playing in a way, he had them playing in a way that was brilliant. And he improved players, played a good brand of football. They were great to watch. He got them to a Champions League final. And he just comes across, as a manager in the same bracket, maybe without the silverware of Pochettino, of Ancelotti, etc., etc. So yeah, there will be pressure. Not right now, but I think he's got till Christmas. I would have thought.
It's 2 years. Can I just add in? It's nearly 2 years.
Yes.
And listen, this is a lovely fairy tale, and I'd love to see it work out. And myself included, we thought towards the end of last season, wow, actually, we all got it wrong. And he's heading there. But it's nearly 2 years. And it was just over 2 years when Jose Mourinho, on the back of months and months and months of criticism, which a lot of, pundits and United fans were thinking was very, very fair, basically, fell on his sword, basically, and lost his job. Well, if United stopped, they changed their philosophy so dramatically that they're not so interested in being successful as a football club now, that they can give this manager extra time. I don't think so. It's just, it's somewhere along the line, you've got to draw, this point and basically say, actually, we're Man United. It's all well and good, but do we want to reach March, be in fifth, be pushing for fourth again, having lost another semi-final and crashed out of Europe? Because
it feels to me like it's a decision that's based on emotion.
Yeah.
Because of his strong connection with the club.
That's what's keeping him in the job at the moment, in my view. Because honestly, if they had one of those big name managers, they'd be saying, we hired you for results. We're Man United. We expect silverware. Sorry. And unfortunately, Solskjaer comes across as a lovely guy. But if you put, there was I really like Rio Ferdinand as a pundit, but he was sort of kind of quizzed on it on the radio not so long back and sort of said, do you think Solskjaer is under pressure? And he answered, well, the first person to put pressure on himself will be Solskjaer. Well, he's dodged the question, Yeah. And so basically, and then again on Sunday, Gary Neville was talking about Man United's failings, not Solskjaer's failings. At what point do we say, it's not just down to Solskjaer, it's not just down to Man United, it's down to Solskjaer. There's got to be a bit of both in there. And if both are failing, that's not a good recipe for success, is it?
No. Good stuff, boys. That's the domestic football world put to rights. Let's move on to the topic of England now. Obviously play Wales tonight at Wembley in a friendly. But sadly, the headlines are all dominated this morning by Gareth in his press conference yesterday, clearly putting a message out that he just won't stand for this stupid behaviour from all of his players, but most notably his younger players. Matt, he was quite clear, wasn't he, in what he said, in that he doesn't want this England squad to be turned into a circus. We all know what's happened this week with the 3 players breaking the COVID rules, coming on the back of what happened in Iceland with Foden and Greenwood. Do you feel that Southgate's been strong enough on this?
I think he's putting a message out, particularly to the younger players. It's very easy to forget how much hard work the FA put in, Southgate put in, the comms team put in to build the good rapport that the Three Lions enjoyed in Russia. How much hard work for young players to open themselves up to scrutiny, to speak openly, to build relationships, everything else that went on into turning the team that was the embarrassment of the nation in 2016 into something we could be proud of just 2 years later. And slowly, new players are coming into the camp and expecting them to be loved as a result. And they're kind of mucking it up by making really stupid decisions in their social lives. that were the sort of things that England worked so hard to try and stamp out. And I think Southgate's a bit fed up with that, the fact they seem to be cashing in on the hard work of their predecessors and expecting life to be easy. It's never going to be easy to pull on that shirt. You're always under pressure. And I just wonder, that seems to be what's really gripping Southgate at the moment, is the young players who should just pipe down, follow the example that's set to them by the senior players who are still working hard to set the right agenda. The Marcus Rashfords, even, I put in that category, Harry Kane, all the good work that's Jordan Henderson. They need to be more like them, and that's what I think Southgate's fed up with.
John, we've all seen over the last few years what great progress England have made under Southgate. We're all in Russia for that great run to the semi-finals. And then there was the Nations League semi-finals as well. Do you have a lot of sympathy for Southgate in terms of, look, he's clearly a bright fellow and a forward-thinking manager, but even someone like him just cannot account for stupidity from footballers?
No, you can't, Jeremy. The only thing is, I've got mixed views about this week, and you're absolutely right on you can't. I don't think account for the stupidity of Greenwood and Foden, for example, and I think that then basically, the players were all told about the protocols. The players were all told of the do's and the don'ts, and they've been sent home from Iceland in disgrace. Now, I actually think that that's on a different level to what's happened with the three boys this week, who I think we've all probably called COVID-idiots in copy, haven't we, this week? And that's how they'll be remembered. And listen, I've got a bit of sympathy here. When it's a surprise birthday party laid on, for Tammy Abraham for his 23rd birthday party by his girlfriend, and they've got about 15 people round the house. Ben Chilwell and Jadon Sancho, they're obviously also invited. And Tammy Abraham walks in the door and everyone's there for him in his honour. And basically, what do you do then at that stage? I mean, blimey, I heard someone on the radio this morning, who got himself into all sorts of bothering during his career, saying, Tammy Abraham should have turned and walked out the house. And basically, yes, he probably should have, but he's been a bit stupid and he's made a mistake. And, and
John, I get your point about
Tammy. But
what about Sancho and Chilwell? How stupid are they for going to the party?
Well, I agree. I agree. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? I do think that basically, and listen, this is my point though, Jeremy. Tammy Abraham's been a bit silly. Jadon Sancho's, been a bit daft as well, and Ben Chilwell there as well. And I actually think the point is for me, right, that Southgate, I think, by not taking them out, he's asked them to report up late, and they've needed to do that so they can be test negative, and he's, frankly, Southgate in his press conference yesterday, despite obviously speaking at length and eloquently, there was tough messages in there that are basically saying, saying that the young players have done nothing to earn this. But I actually think actions speak louder than words. And I think that basically, I feel really strongly that the stronger message was needed, because it hasn't been heeded clearly after Foden and Greenwood. It hasn't been heeded after, various other indiscretions like, Maddison and the casino, like, you had the Gomez Sterling bust up. I think, Andy wrote really well about it this morning, about the kind of the past year and the difficulties facing, Southgate and the squad. And I think a clearer message, even more than that kind of, Southgate's, iron fist in a velvet glove sort of approach to his press conferences, really sort of kind of underlying messages, would have been to say, sorry, lads, the country's in crisis. We're heading for another national lockdown at this rate. Football is being particularly hit. So, realise it's not on the scale of the other two, but we're going to say, we're going to stand you down for this squad. And I feel really strongly that that's what he should have done, because I think he's done it in a halfway house here. In the basic, he offered them some kind of comfort and some sort of, message there. And then in the next breath, he's saying, but they've basically they've kind of let the squad down. And we need to set the right example. Which is it? Because, I was talking to Andy about this yesterday. He kind of, he's written about this kind of his little girl's sort of birthday parties who observe the rule of six. Well, my mum had her birthday. You know, I'd love to have had a family gathering, but we observed the rule of 6. Everyone else has done it. So what makes footballers exempt? I just don't get it. They shouldn't have been allowed back in the squad. I'm sorry. It's hard. And, you see what's happened with the Scotland squad, for example. Well, those players are adamant that they social distanced. And yet actually now other players are having to self-isolate for 14 days because them the rules. And, there's no exception for them. And yet England are finding an exception for their player. I just don't understand it. And frankly, if you're sending out a weak message like that in actions, you're not addressing the real heart of the issue.
Andy, John made the point there that obviously Southgate's offered or suggested there may be a way back into the squad for these 3 later in the week, maybe over the weekend, depending on what happens with the testing and the investigation. Do you think he's now teed himself up for a bit of a fall if they do come back into the fold for the last game? Do you think John's right? They should have dealt with it from the offset and said, right, what's happened. You're out of this squad. I'm going to name 3 more players instead.
Yeah. They should have done that as soon as the story came out. I totally agree with Johnny. He's put it brilliantly. They should have done that as soon as the story emerged. They said, instead they said, their arrival into the England camp will be delayed. Yeah, they should have delayed it until next month. I mean, that much is simple. I wrote that the day after the incident. Again, and John referred to, we have social functions and we have to abide by the rule of 6. I mean, literally, you've got children having parties. You have to pick 3 or 4 of their friends to come. And the same goes throughout all the families. And it was just an obvious thing to do to me, is just to say, and John's right again. Gareth did come across very, very, you could tell his patience has snapped. But all the time at the back of his mind, I guess, is this nagging practicality that, he is England manager and he has the squad for a finite amount of time. And these are key players that basically he needs there. There's no doubt about that. What I would say is that what was interesting, I thought as well about last night, was that this idea, I think he was quite strong in what he said in terms of the players haven't proved themselves yet. And I think the alarming thing for him will be that, he's always put a lot of faith in players who've been, from a very early age, have been earmarked to come through the system, and which is great, and that's served him well. However, now you're getting players that are coming through the system who I think, and I suspect he thinks, think they've got almost some given right to be in the England team. So what possessed Phil Foden and Mason Greenwood to do what they did? I mean, because they're young and, probably don't know much better, maybe. However, there was a certain element of, I looked at the contrast between Foden and Greenwood and Connor Cody in that last England squad that was away in Iceland and Denmark. For Foden and Greenwood, they both said it was a dream come true, etc., etc. But to them, really, it was just a rite of passage. They've known since they were, goodness knows, that they were going to be superstars. They were going to get big contracts at their clubs. They were going to play for England one day. It was just a question of when. And I think that was what Southgate was getting on. It's reminding those type of players, well, listen, you haven't actually done anything yet, so don't be big-time Charlies when you've only just got into the team, even though you knew you were getting into that squad. Someone like Connor Cody, can you imagine him dreaming of doing anything that would have undermined his debut, for England? It would undermine his work. It wasn't, because to him, it was something that he probably never, as he said, never dreamt would happen. And when it does, he would do nothing to jeopardise it. I think that's what Southgate was getting at, this whole swathe of young players now who have come through, who they've known they're going to be superstars. Mason Greenwood, Phil Foden, Jadon Sancho, Tammy Abraham to a certain extent, maybe. And they're the people I think that Southgate's going to cite. But I totally agree with John. This is a halfway house. Listen, it might be the medical people say the tests, mean they can't join up for the game on Sunday. In which case, really, But now it seems that he's just trying to find a way to leave them out, when really he could have actually said at the start, listen, lads, you've messed up my preparations again. Take yourselves off. We'll see you back at the next camp, as he did with Foden and Greenwood.
Andy touched on it. A lot of these players, they come through years and years of schooling at academies in the top flight, from a really young age, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. they're educated while they're taught how to play football. You'd think they'd be able to grasp what is a simple rule, basically. But is there an element of these players spending so much time in these closeted environments, these cocoons, if you like, that they come up out of them into the first team and, you know, into the big bad world and make it to England? Do you think they come out there with a sense that they're bulletproof and they're above the law and the normal rules of the land don't apply to them?
I was about to say exactly what you've said as my answer, whatever question you'd asked me, pretty much. So I just need to say yes. At the same time as we've had, those examples of those players that have been closeted, it was a privilege to speak for the first time at length and listening to Dominic Calvert-Lewin this week. And regardless of taking his hat off when he met Gareth Southgate, which just, it's those, and Southgate himself said, it's those little touches that tell you about the man, and he's got respect. I always remember, that twisty-turny staircase up to the Arsenal press room. Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain once backing up 3 steps to allow a group of journalists up. And it's that kind of humanity that people show, that respect to. He may be a fantastically talented footballer, but he was just a teenager at the time, and it was a sign that, and I think we all agree he's one of the good guys in the game, and he's one of the ones with his head screwed on right. Similarly, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but he went out to Stadium-Bridge Celtic, and literally the school of hard knocks. 20 minutes in, he's got a shiner. He knows, and he said he spoke to players that were doing this job to put food on the table, and are hoping to be able to put food on the table next week and then the week after. They're not out there playing thinking, I've just got to bide my time and then I'm going to be an England player. It's absolutely right. The sense of entitlement that's within the game, particularly amongst the young players, is always there. And that's what Southgate worked so hard to stamp out in 2016. I think he sees it creeping back again. And Andy's right. I think it would have been a stronger message for him to have kicked them out for the whole week. But I think where Gareth got confused on this one occasion is he doesn't see that what they did was on England duty. Well, once they're England players, they're always England players. And regardless of whether they're in the club's watch or on England watch, which I think he's drawn a distinction on, they are international footballers and representing their country on and off the field. And I think he needs to be tougher on that.
John, it's obviously a massive sort of period coming up for Southgate leading up to next summer and the Euros. Every manager, England manager, has a crisis of some description. It's as sure as the sun rising in the morning. Gareth's managed to avoid that up until now. But do you feel like this is his moment where we're going to learn something new about him and how he deals with all these scandals? And do you feel like it's in danger of unravelling all the good work that he's done?
I do really. I think it's a crossroads for him, because I think in many ways, listen, it's a big squad, isn't it? He named 30 players originally, and within that, I think you've got a core of hugely talented world-class players, and I'm talking Harry Kane, Raheem Sterling. I do think Jordan Henderson has just won the title and the Champions League with Liverpool. There can be no argument that basically just how good he is. I love Marcus Rashford and everything that sort of kind of he stands for. I think there's a wonderful talent, and there are young talented players coming through, and at the forefront of those are Foden and Greenwood. Equally, I think it's going to be an experimental lineup against Wales, much changed. And I think it's going to be a little bit all over the shop, if you like. And you could break that down and say, oh, okay, that's a bit of an interesting, weird England lineup. Simply because I just, and then the fact that then is that, if you're experimenting, it looks a little bit, I wouldn't like to say average, but basically it's not an outstanding England lineup. And I think that Southgate is at that point where he's sort of almost looking to the good guys, the well-behaved guys, as a bit of an example, to set. And I think Southgate needs to be the manager that can really manage the big names but also some of the more difficult, perhaps, characters. I'm talking perhaps the sort of the younger ones at this point, to kind of get that message across so that they are managed fairly but equally, and that he has to get everything right. And this is a big test for him, because it felt like a wonderful sort of ride on the way to Russia in the World Cup semi-finals. And I think that momentum swept along, and no one could quite believe what they were seeing, and everyone bought into it. Well, now we're back to kind of what England was before. A few issues, few talking points. You know, can the best players turn up and perform for England? And we're back to kind of square one. So it feels like a point in time for Southgate. And I think he needs to get back to the kind of that connection, that wonderful feel-good factor in amongst the players. And that's, for me, the biggest challenge. And we'll find out so much more about Southgate now, between now and the Euros next summer, than I think perhaps we even did going into Russia. And it's a major test, I think, you know, for his man management skills more than anything else. And I think perhaps as England manager, because, you know, you inherit the best players in the country, that's what you do. You know, that's what it means to be a national manager. I think it's much more important about your man management skills than actually as a coach.
Andy, Jen alluded to the fact that Gareth's probably going to name an unfamiliar team tonight against Wales. It's the friendly, after all, ahead of the two more important games coming up. The goalkeeping issue is quite an interesting one, because it sounds like he's going to give Nick Pope a run out tonight. Pickford's been under a lot of scrutiny for quite a while now. You know, he seems to be sort of quite consistent in the fact that he's dropping clangers, you know, on a regular basis. He was in the spotlight again last weekend with just a basic error that, you know, just is unforgivable, really, I suppose. But then Pope was at fault for a goal for Burnley too. You know, and we've got Henderson also, who's not getting picked at United. So how do you see that? Do you think Pickford needs a break? Do you think it's right to drop him, if that's the right way to phrase it? Do you think it's a bit of a grey area, the goalkeeping situation?
I think let's separate club versus country at the moment. It's an interesting one in that I do think it's right that he gives Pope, if only as he intimated, a reward for his, you know, unstinting behind the scenes service, basically, you know, for basically helping train the other goalkeepers for, you know, a month and a half or whatever it was in Russia. So, you know, Pope deserves, you know, a moment out there at Wembley. That's fine. I think he'll recall Pickford for what he sees as, you know, the competitive games in the Nations League. So I don't think at the moment he's of a mind to replace Pickford as his first choice keeper for England, because basically, apart from the odd error, I remember one that in the end didn't prove costly, but away in Spain, in Seville, and there's been a couple more sort of questionable ones. But, you know, he would argue that Pickford hasn't particularly let him down. Obviously, now what would change is if the Carlo Ancelotti decides that he can no longer keep faith with Pickford and uses the keeper he says, Robin Olsen, he's just signed on loan in the transfer window, and Pickford loses number one spot at Everton. You would then have this bizarre situation where two of your three first choice England keepers, Pickford and Dean Henderson, were not first choice of their clubs. And you know, that would be an extremely worrying situation for Southgate. I think as long as Pickford is playing for Everton's first team, I think he will remain Southgate's number one choice. And I think that's fine. You know, Pickford himself needs to eliminate these mistakes. I think the issue will come is if he loses the confidence, complete confidence of Ancelotti, then it's hard to see where Southgate's going to go. I think Henderson would be a popular choice amongst maybe even players who rate Henderson very highly. But the issue he's got is that he's not getting Manchester United's team. England cannot go into a European Championship with two of their three keepers being EFL Cup keepers. It's just, you know, that's not feasible. And as you mentioned, you know, Pope made a mistake at the weekend. I would say overall he doesn't make many mistakes. So yeah, it's a really, really tough one. But the bottom line is, if you're asking me the question, does Southgate keep faith in competitive games and long term with Pickford? Right now he does. That will change if Ancelotti loses faith.
Matt, there aren't that many games between now and next summer and the Euros. is Gareth? If you were Gareth Southgate, would you name a really experimental team tonight, or would you just throw 2 or 3 options in there, just have a look at them, and keep the core of his base players, if you like?
Well,
when
I
does he need to start formulating his starting 11 for the Euros and getting them, in a regular cycle?
I have to be honest, increasingly tonight's fixture seems to be more and more like the sort of social gathering between neighbours that we're supposed to be cracking down on. That's completely pointless. I don't know what he learns tonight. Getting down, having a game with the guys down the road. Half the people don't really know each other. He's got a better idea of his squad than he needs to find anything out about tonight. It could be a chance for Calvert-Lewin to dip his toe in the water. That's great. But yeah, like you say, the time is ticking down to Euro 2020 finally. I think this stage last year, he had a better idea of what his team was going to be if the finals had taken place last summer. And I think the problem he's got is the pressure is being put under by that Gary is being put under by Jose Mourinho and all his mates not to play everyone all 3 games this week. And it's quite right. It's a big ask given the hectic domestic schedule. So I just wonder if he'd have been better off just having a training camp for this first part, not having a fixture at all tonight, keeping his squad low and working with the 22 that he's getting a fairly good idea already he's going to be picking next summer.
John, just going back to domestic football, it was sad to see Jack Wilshere released from West Ham on transfer deadline day. Obviously, we know there's a great player in there. We've seen a great player down the years, but he's been so unlucky with injuries. But he's still only 28. I've read people saying, his career's finished. He won't get another move. What? I mean, you know the Wilshere family pretty well. What do you think? What do you think will happen? Do you think he can still get a move to a Premier League club and revive his career?
I don't know on a Premier League club, if I'm brutally honest. I think he's had offers from abroad. I think he's had an offer, from Rangers, and it will be interesting to see. What I do really, I've known Jack Wilshere for a long time and kind of, really like him, respect him as a player and as an individual, and I feel really, really sorry for him. He went to West Ham having been offered a contract at Arsenal, and basically did get a really good offer at West Ham, and it would have been very easy for him to sit tight and stay there on, a reputed £100,000 a week until the end of the season. Well, the measure of the player and of the man is that basically he said, no, I want to play. I'm passionate about wanting to play, still believe I can do a job. So rather than sit there and take the money, he basically, that's why it came to a conclusion on deadline day. They agreed on kind of a settlement, and then that means then that he's free to go and free to get out and play. And I respect that and admire that. I mean, I've been on the show. It's been confirmed that Arsenal have left Mesut Ozil out of their squad, and so basically he's not in the Europa League squad, which, listen, we saw coming, been reported and did the story, but it's still a shock when he's not in. And now he's got nowhere to go because basically what's the point in leaving now? They tried to settle in the past. It's not worked. And now he's sat on a contract that he can't leave, and he can't sign for any other major club at least until January because he's under contract and an Arsenal player. And Wilshere didn't want to get stuck into that situation. And so I respect that. I still think he can do a job. He will argue, listen, he's had issues, injury issues at West Ham, and no one has been left more disappointed and frustrated by those than Jack Wilshere. But I think he's got himself into a place where he is fit. He does feel annoyed and frustrated that he's not been able to show to West Ham that basically what he can do as a player. And maybe he should have gone abroad sooner. Because I think that perhaps a different pace, a different pressure, a different physical style might suit him, because I think, there's no doubt about it. We've all seen down the years what he can do with a football and what a talent he is. And I just think it's such a shame that I think he was probably Arsene Wenger played him too much, relied on him too much, played him too much at a young age. When I think that the medical advice was saying, "Oh, he needs to have a rest here," and it was, his body was too stressed, and it's come back to bite him now. But I still feel strongly that he's got something to offer, and that determination burns brightly within. That he can play at a decent level, and I really believe that is the case, because the determination is there.
Let's hope you're right, John. Andy, just before we wrap things up for this week, the headlines over the last few days have been dominated by two things: COVIDiots and a dinosaur. Gunnosaurus has famously been given the chop at Arsenal, and then good old Mesut Ozil, who John referred to, stepped in and offered to pay his wages to keep him in a job. Did that story make your heart melt, or did the cynic in you think that's just a PR stunt from Ozil just to try and get some good grades back?
Well, I did think to myself, actually, in the end, was it 55 people were made redundant by Arsenal, and Ozil didn't step in to save any one of them. And this was just another person. This was slightly different in that this particular person happened to be wearing a big woolly dinosaur costume. So I don't see what the difference was really, apart from the fact that was his work outfit was slightly different, probably from the suits that were worn by the other 50-odd people who were made redundant. So yeah, to that extent, it was. But having said that, you still can't be too. If Ozil wants to step in and pay for someone to keep his job, then that's absolutely fine. But yes. It was certainly, the thing is, he'll pay for him as long as I'll pay for him as long as I'm an Arsenal player. Well, that clearly will only be a year, so he's offering me a year's money, which I'm sure Mesut Ozil on 350 grand a week can cover quite easily. What I would say, and John's referring to news that's come out while we've been doing this, that Ozil, as predicted, is not in the Arsenal squad for the Europa League. Overall, I mean, everyone knows how much I like Ozil as a player. It's just a shame that we're not seeing this guy play football, and both parties maybe have responsibility for this. For Ozil to be happy, well, not happy, but to be not wanting, it seems, to play football, to get out of the club and play football somewhere else at his age, in his early 30s, is such a shame. And for Arsenal to admit, or Arteta, to be fair, not to be able to incorporate a player of such wonderful talent into the team is also a shame. It's also a failing on Arsenal's part, and a failing on Ozil's part.
Good stuff. I totally agree. Okay, boys, that's it for this week. Thanks very much for joining us, Matt Dunn, Andy Dunn, and John Cross. I'll see you all later at Wembley. So hopefully see you next week. Thank you very much.